at the sort of the filtering of applications for Muridi, we absolutely go through with that kind of viewpoint. Could this be a global idea? I think the other thing as well, though, is it's not necessarily could the idea be applicable in other larger scale markets. It's also the thinking of the entrepreneur. And it's that mindset of thinking, how could I make this work elsewhere? Could I do things differently? Could I break outside of that mold that I'm used to seeing every day? So it's not necessarily just the technology, it's also the team, the people behind the idea, because frankly, those are the people that are actually going to make it happen. It's not necessarily just going to happen by itself.
It's a really interesting point, because when you look at corporate Australia is not necessarily that good at really expanding offshore. I mean, there's a few, but there's a bit of a lack of aspiration. In fact, if you run a corporation and you go into Asia, often your share price goes down, not up. So it's a big, we'll come back to that one. Dan, your view? Do you think that when you look at companies, that do they need to have global applicability when you look at it?
Depends on market size.
Yeah.
I think if the market's large enough in Australia, you'll still have a play at it. But generally, I mean, it's an interesting observation. I spent 4 years working in the UK, and when I came back to Australia, there was still a bit of a mentality of, I'm happy to be the king of Bondi Beach. I want to get my business right, and if I can dominate Australia, that's a great story. And I think there's been a real evolution in the last sort of 3 years since I got back. The mentality's shifted, and I think people are certainly focused on getting themselves at least out to another international market, be it the US, Asia, or what have you, which again builds on the whole connectivity thing. It's so fundamental that you have the right people on the ground who are going to take you in there.
I'd like to come back to that too, because there's people that are very important. So Amir and Doug, talk to us about your, in Israel, I mean, there you are, Europe, at your doorstep. I mean, is that always right at the forefront when you're looking at ideas about its global applicability?
I think so, and I think I'll go back. I think it's really about the mindset.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing you have to think is that it's not about expanding to global market. It's about aspiring to be a global leader from the very first day.
Right.
If you want to be a high impact company, there is no substitute to that. You cannot think about it later. You cannot say, okay, I'll sell into the domestic market. In Israel, it's not an option because the market is very small. But if you're Australian or European or whatever, there is no other choice. Because if you think about it, only 2 or 3 years down the road, someone else in Europe, in the US, will be there, and you've lost the game already. So it's about the mindset and the aspiration to be the global leader for the very first day for high impact startups. So completely different game for, let's say, SME and traditional industry and so forth. And there you have to split between entrepreneurship and innovation. And what are the things that needs to be done? There's a lot of work that is being done in many other places, is how to apply entrepreneurship into enabling the SME and traditional industry to grow and not to stay behind and so forth.
So you would segment startups as a different group to traditional SMEs that may scale?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
In the tools that you have to apply in order to...
I would agree with you. I think we somehow use these terms interchangeably and it's not good. Doc, do you have a view?
Sure.
Yeah, I should know.
So first of all, the smaller you are, the more global you are. That's part of life. Yeah. And in today's world, flat world, you can't think locally. You have to think globally because let's take as an example a consumer product. If you think about Australia and you have a great idea of a product, in a very short time, the knowledge about this product will get to China, get to America. Someone else will do it, and since he will address a much larger market, in a very short time he will come in a much better product. And this product will get to Australia very, very fast. Give not too much time, and your company will be destroyed. So the thinking has to be global. The world is really flat in the sense that we do have in Israel, many companies in Israel actually are established in Israel, and then the CEO and the marketing guys are moving to California or to New York. Maybe part of the R&D goes to Ukraine, yes. And the production, of course, where you're going, not to China anymore, to Vietnam, or somewhere else, because that's the world today. Everything is connected, everything is transferable, and the knowledge is spreading very, very fast.
And that is so true, I mean, because when you talk to startups and you're implying it's a digital enabled startup, and it is a global world, no matter as soon as you look at it. So then why do you think that there are not more successful Australian startups that go global? What is preventing us? Because I can name on my hand probably the number of great Australian companies. Now, by the way, I'm also learning there's far more successful small, startups than we are aware of that don't get, but there aren't enough. So, anyone got a view about why? Is it there's not the money? Is it the attitude? Is it because we feel like we're at the bottom of the Pacific? What? I'll start with Tobias, then I'll go to Doug. Okay.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot more success stories than probably we know about because, as we're fairly young yet as a country and as an entrepreneurial country. So it's a slow immersion into mainstream media, these success stories. But I also think because we are a young and relatively immature entrepreneurial community, that this whole concept of participating in a global sense we're late to the party. And so all of us on this stage are working toward helping companies really get their head around that, as Annie was saying, get their head around that early, help them get around thinking that way, and then helping them launch into those global communities. So I think it's happening, but like I said, when I got back in 2009, I couldn't find an entrepreneur to save my life, or one who would admit that they were an entrepreneur.
And when you came back, do you think that people recognise the skills that you had from living overseas and coming back?
Well, people didn't know what to do with me, actually, because anyone who had worked overseas or worked in the U.S. or the UK and was familiar with what those technology type economies looked like understood. But I don't think anybody would disagree that we as a country are only getting our head around all of this in the last 5-6 years.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come back and ask you what we need to do, Doug, and then I'll go to Dan. Yeah.
I think the reason is because you have an amazing country. You have unbelievable, amazing country.
We do.
It's a nice country. It's nice people. People are not driven to go out to California. Now, we thought that Israel is a bad country. It's not what I'm hinting. But life here are relatively very easy. It's very comfortable. Yeah. And, the comfortable life are keeping people in this place. And going to California is not something that everybody here dreams about. That's part of it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. We've had 15 years now of sort of economic growth of thereabouts, and we're still tracking at 2 to 3%. Resources come off a bit, but life still is okay. And somehow I think we are lacking ambition. Anyway, Dan, what do you think?
I mean, there actually are quite a few Australians now heading into the Valley. I think there's 20,000 Australians which are currently in California, which is a pretty reasonable number. But I'm going to flip it on its head. I think there's never been a better time to be Australian. I think that Turnbull and the coalition government sort of policy around startups and providing investors sort of motivation or incentives to invest is a great step in the right direction. I think we're building a community of champions. When you've got a Atlassian or Campaign Monitor or any of those big startups, becoming successful, it's not just about the top guys who are going to, cash out. You've got the tier 2, tier 3 guys and girls that come out and then start up their own startup and do something themselves, and then they teach the ecosystem what process those big organizations ended up going through, startups, to become big organizations, the process they went through. So I think we're right at the beginning, but there's some great signs, and when we have those sorts of people out in the system teaching their lessons, that's a good thing. And I think the VC market's probably getting a little more sophisticated. I think there's a lot of education still required. I think, a bit of a challenge in Australia is probably the view that people invest in VC and wonder why they're not getting returns in 1 or 2 years. I think people need to appreciate that patience. But I think the VC market's getting a lot more sophisticated with better interconnectivity into other jurisdictions. And all of that you know, this whole ecosystem language we always hear. You need a whole bunch of different ingredients to create success.
So I share your optimism as well, though I do worry about some of those 20,000 in the Valley, because a lot of them are still working for large corporates. They're not all working in startup world. And how many have gone there exactly for the reason that you are alluding to, which is getting better, which is for funding, which is...
So on the funding point, David, just for a stat for you, in 2015, the VC funding market in Australia was around about $350, $360 million. Since the end of last year, and I think it was up to around about August, 900 million in VC funding in Australia. So it is drastically shifting. Clearly there's more to be done. I completely agree with Dan's point there. The other stat I'll tell you, and this is fresh, hot off the presses, because we've just closed our application window for the next intake of startups for Sydney here. And typically 3 years ago, the applications we were getting were very early stage. They were pre-revenue, pre-funding, and just really smart people who needed a bit of help. Of the applications that we've received in the last month, collectively, those startups are either generating revenue or have funding collectively of about $13 million. So it's coming, and it's coming off the second wave of we do need more Atlassians and Canvas and whoever else, but it's those people, once they move on from that role as being a head of product development and then start their own business, it's coming, and it's coming quickly. So we should be really positive about that. That's great.
That's great. So then, Amir and Doug, what do you think as a nation you could do? So that $900 million extra funding into the startup Series A, maybe B round. Interestingly, here, 100 million of that's 200 million, and $500 million from, that's the Biotech Medical Translation Fund. So nearly $700 million of that underpinned by government. Are we getting, but very little from superannuation funds, $3 trillion of money in super funds. It ain't flowing, and because many of you here may still have superannuation funds, and you demand your funds to give you a pretty good return, and they will not risk that money. So how do you change the risk profile if that is the issue of these companies? You got any views on that?
So, I've done kind of a similar analytical process in the state of Victoria, and I think the situation is probably not too much different in here. I think, first of all, it's the mindset, by all means, and I won't repeat that, but I think there are a few enablers that are weak if you compare it to Israel and Boston, and they need to be strengthened. One of them is definitely risk capital, and I agree, it's been significant change in the past 3 years, especially in the last year. But still, if you compare it to the baseline of Israel and Boston, it's still low, and it needs to be better. That's number one. Number two, I think there is a lack of experienced second time and third time successful entrepreneur that could go back to the community and be a role model, active chairman, angel investor. There are, but not enough. And the third element by far is the lack of high density of multinational corporations. Now, all those are enablers that most people that think about this problem, I mean, easily recognize. The question is how to do, what to do in order to fix them. And I think the answer, and I won't go into detail, but the answer is to work in a bi-directional manner. One is going globally and try to experience and connect with those enablers, partly in Australia, but partly remotely, and people around me are doing it already anyway, but it needs to continue along the trend. And the other one is the other way, and basically what you need to do, I would say more, the test for the success of this activity is that you don't have, for example, to convince multinational corporations to come to Sydney or Melbourne. They will know, like they know today in Israel, that this is the place to go for talent, for the right entrepreneurial ecosystem, and for the place that everything happens.
That's really great. Doug, do you agree?
Well, first, Israel is never agree. Whatever the subject you agree. So if you would say it's a day, I would say no, it's night. Of course, it's night. It's dark. And I prove it, of course. So I think that I have this notice about we need to bring to Australia the international companies, it's great having Google, Facebook, Intel, whatever. And in Israel, by the way, I see the phenomenon when a large company operates its activity in Israel, our prime ministers announce it as a great achievement, whatever. But I'm not sure it's good. I think that it's the opposite. I think that actually the fact that we do have very strong activity of international companies in Israel, in a small level it's okay, it gets to a level that they consume the brains. And when they consume the brains, there is no other high-tech, and there is no, if it, theoretically they will continue to go, there won't be real high-tech in Israel, because having guys, engineers working for Facebook and Google is not really creating an industry. It creates good jobs to very smart people. Good jobs for very smart people, it's good, it's, you know, but it's not what we really want. We want to see industry. We want to see marketing guys and sales guys and logistics and even maybe not production, but guys that take care of production if it happens wherever it's happened.
Interesting.
So I'm not sure that you need to go after
so on multinationals. Well, I mean, it's been interesting because one of the things, we don't have as many multinationals here doing development work. The only one of the big current ones would be Google, have quite a large engineering community. Obviously, Maps came from Australia originally. But when you go through the others, Facebook, Amazon, IBM, there's very little development work done here that I'm aware of. And therefore, we actually, if I talk to Atlassian, if I talk to Mike Cannon, Brooks or Scott, they say we don't have enough skills here. And so the whole issue with visas, we're not got enough people here, we can't even find the right people. So they've taken a lot of the development off to Vietnam, for goodness sake. Now, they've, you know, probably a little bit of cost. So it's a big challenge for us, how we keep building this ecosystem. I'm going to come to the audience in a moment. So if you've got any questions of the panel or any comments on this area, because I don't know if there's a simple answer to the questions we've got. Could I just ask, I mean, we look at our innovation system and there's a couple of things. We have great researchers, both at universities, scientists, technologists. But we have a very poor track record in two areas. Commercialization of great ideas, which often is related to funding. And secondly, we're very poor at collaborating and recognizing each other and encouraging each other. When I go to the Valley, I mean, there's the Israeli mafia. I mean, I love you dearly, but, there's a strong community. Everyone knows each other. Whereas that's not the case as much, I think, with Australians. Maybe Dan, you've got a view. Do you think we need to do more about driving collaboration and actually making some bets, or do you think we should just leave it free flow and, so Victoria can do, I don't know, biotech and we'll do a little bit of Garvin, or do you think we need to be more, focused about, we're only 24 million people, and I see us competing between states and not collaborating enough. But do you agree with that, Toka?
Yeah. The short answer is probably yes. Yes, I do agree with that. And having done my companies in the U.S. and had that generosity of the American people around supporting innovation and entrepreneurship, it was quite a different experience. And clearly, that is an area that I'm quite interested in. And in Springboard, that is one of the key assets to the program. This development of community and the giving back and the virtuous cycle of giving back as an entrepreneur. So we have this global network, in the U.S. and Israel and and Australia primarily, where the program is run. But the alumni from that program,
it's really strong.
It's the strength really of our IP, because that becomes your community. That's your tribe, and that makes a difference in your business, because if you have 650 people who believe in you and are at the other end of an email or a phone for any kind of challenge you may have, that's where you go.
I completely agree with the same thing with Muridi as well. And on the point on sort of competing between states, it is rife and it needs to stop. I was on a panel, and I'm not going to mention the person's name, about 3 or 4 months ago, and they were representing Victoria and bagging New South Wales. I'm going, you're in Sydney, number one. I mean, that's probably a dumb choice, but also it's Australia as one country. We shouldn't be kind of pitting ourselves against each other, because all we're doing is wasting time. if I look at what we've done with our partnership up in Brisbane, it's incredible what we're able to do just to help each other. The Brisbane teams are coming down from Brizzy in a couple of weeks' time, and we're putting in front of them all of the very best mentors from the Sydney ecosystem to help them, and doing the same in reverse. And it is one of the things that I think state governments need to help us all a little bit. Because, the rife competition is getting a bit boring. There you go, David.
So Dan, you're more positive about where we go.
Always.
That's
more
good, and I like
positive.
this.
Always more positive. I just think, and it actually goes to the multinational point, which I absolutely would never question Doug Moran, obviously. But we have a slightly different take, despite acknowledging that. I think, what we're trying to do is build almost like a marketplace community.
Yeah.
So we have, entrepreneurs, smart people with great ideas coming onto our platform to connect with investors, of which we have 15,000 now in 100 countries. And, because they're picking deals rather than investing in a fund, they're totally engaged and they want to help the company and connect them up to whatever they need. But then I think what's super powerful is we have a whole bunch of corporates which are also on the platform as partners watching what's coming up and how they can acquire some of that technology to incorporate into their business, for benefit. So it's a win-win for everyone. It's not just about, acquiring the companies necessarily as much as bringing in complementary technology that they could use. So we're, hunting around in Israel, the US, elsewhere, deal flow for General Electric, Honda, Shell. If they like the deal, then, in their particular sector, it's probably likely that we will as well. And then we're able to huddle around that startup, the right kind of people, this collaboration.
And as we all know, it's more than just money. It's all that experience of helping people move through, managing cash, all those other things. Okay,